This is such a relevant topic, and welcome everyone. We are good to go. Thank you everyone for your patience as I move from Zoom room to the next Zoom room. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Kim. She's a tenured professor at the Wright Institute in Berkeley. She received her BA in psychology from UC Berkeley and her PhD in clinical psychology with a minor in developmental psychology from UCLA. She's a National Ronald McNair Scholar and the recipient of a number of awards, including American Psychological Association Minority Fellowship, Okura Mental Health Fellowship, and APAC Psychology Award. In addition to graduate teaching, she has a private practice specializing in treating children and adolescent patients with anxiety disorders, depression, and neurocognitive disorders using cognitive behavioral therapy, attachment theory, family systems, and Buddhist psychology. She also provides diversity, equity, and inclusion consultation and training to organizations. In recent years, she served as president of the Alameda County Psychological Association, chair of California Psychological Association Immigrant Task Force, and CPA state program. CPA State Diversity Delegate in APA Division 31 Diversity Leadership Development Program. Dr. Kim is the lead author of It's Time to Talk and Listen, How to Have Constructive Conversations About Race, Class, Sexuality, Ability, and Gender in a Polarized World, and of Clinical Psychology Internship for Underrepresented Students, an Inclusive Approach toward Higher Education. So excited to have you here, and please join me in a virtual welcome, welcoming Dr. Kim, and I will be quiet now, and you can take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Barbara, for that introduction. Hello, everyone. What a pleasure it is to be with all of you. Today, I will speak to you about a particular approach to having constructive conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, that focuses really on concrete skills to move, if you will, beyond insight and awareness into action. So to this end, the objectives of this talk is to briefly address why conversations on culture and diversity are difficult, what missteps commonly and predictably get in our way, all of us, and then finally, what can we do differently to truly move the needle to have more honest and brave and constructive conversations that support social justice and to amplify the integrity of our work as professionals. So I want to thank Sam in advance for helping me advance the slides. So let's see, Sam, if we could get to, I just talked about the objectives, if we could get there. So I'll start here in terms of why conversations on diversity, equity, and inclusion are so difficult. Okay? And what I'll do is, as I go, I'll spend about 40-ish minutes going over the content of it, and I hope that we will have at least 15 minutes at the end for a more interactive conversation, Q&A, and comments. But let me start here. Why are DEI conversations so difficult? Well, I want to highlight a number of factors that contribute to this challenge. First and foremost, historical baggage. So inherent in these conversations are long-standing issues of trauma. Right? We're talking about imperialism, genocide, colonialism, slavery, incarceration, concentration camps. So conversations on culture and diversity are difficult because it comes with a backdrop that is long-standing, extremely violent, traumatic, and deeply, deeply painful. As clinicians, we know that context matters, right? And this particular historical and critical backdrop, both here in this country and globally, is the sobering reality that is inherent and that must be acknowledged. That is the backdrop in these conversations. So they make it very, very difficult. Not only that, many of these traumas, as you well know, remain unresolved and ongoing. Yes, there might be the case that it's against the law, at least in some parts of this country and the world, to discriminate others based on one's identity. And certainly laws offer this very important, if not necessary, protection for its citizens. But laws also remain very blunt instruments that cannot on its own protect, repair, or heal what has and continues to inflict pain, violence, and division. So historical baggage, first and foremost. Second, these are conversations and topics that involve strong, if not at times disorganizing and unwieldy emotions. Right? Remember, they are a reflection of the trauma that I just mentioned. So these are feelings such as deep pain and fear, anger, guilt, rage, shame. These are not easy emotions to manage or navigate, especially when they reflect these long-standing, unresolved, and still unfolding trauma. And we all know as mental health specialists that when our emotion center is activated with such strong and again at times disorganizing emotions, our ability to think and respond soundly and mindfully can become compromised for all of us, including those of us who specialize in strong emotions. So historical baggage, strong emotions, there's also this wish for many of us across all kinds of dimensions for quick and easy fixes. And to be sure, this is not a clinical situation or a case of an uncomplicated situational set of symptoms that can be, fixed in a short-term treatment. Not at all. And yet many of us, myself included, fall victim to the delusion, if not fantasy, of quick solutions, a path with least resistance, less amount of time and effort, even as we know this is going to take lots of time, lots of energy, and lots of diligence. Okay? So not a quick fix. That makes it challenging. And then finally, these are conversations and topics that we know involve high stakes. So high stakes such as if it goes not well or wrong, right? Then there's a great possibility of misunderstanding, of possible rupture, disagreement, retaliation, maybe, a compromise in terms of our reputation at work or in our families and in our community. There's also the possible high stakes of one's actual literal safety. Never mind our emotional, psychological, spiritual safety. So the high stakes are real. We have seen it, we have experienced it, and as such, they make it more realistic and challenging. And taken together, these conversations can feel absolutely overwhelming, if not impossible at times, as if we are flinging open Pandora's box, as if we are on an elephant trying to balance on a small plastic beach ball. So no wonder they're challenging. No wonder we abort, many of us, our efforts prematurely or decide we're not even going to try at all. So let's take a look at the next slide. And, you can't do a DEI work or even a talk without addressing, even briefly, the matters of power, privilege, and identities. And so to add yet another layer to an already challenging situation is the complex matter of power, privilege, and cultural identities and their intersections. We don't have certainly enough time today to fully address the phenomenon of power and privilege, but I trust that we can agree that they are complex, they are multidimensional, and they are critical to any DEI work. In general, there are two main levels of power and privilege that we must be cognizant of, especially when we're trying to do this work in places of our profession. First, our contextual identities. So these are our roles, our status, our proximity to leadership in our workplace. It matters a lot, and a lot to DEI conversation if my title is that of a client, of a director, clerical staff, custodial staff, supervisor, trainee. All of those things matter, and how proximate, right, those titles and those roles are to where the power of that organization lies. It matters a lot. Second identity is the second level of power and privilege and identity is that of personal cultural identity. So this is our racial, gender, class, religion, ability, sexual orientation, immigration status, things of that sort. That also matter when we're talking about DEI and power and privilege. It's very difficult to know how to navigate the complex intersections of power, privilege, and inner identities when having DEI conversations. What identity should be centered, for instance, when a white client makes this racist comment directed at a BIPOC clinician? Or maybe the client says something homophobic and both the client and I identify as heterosexual. What then? Whose identity in situations like this should be privileged? It's not such a straightforward answer, is it? And of course, all of this is made even more difficult by the fact that in this field, we're often not trained or encouraged to speak up, to be direct, to even challenge our clients, to center the needs of the professional, right? Even in instances in which the professional holds a subjugated personal identity, such as might be the case when the clinician identifies as BIPOC, queer, trans, has a disability, etc. And yet, what we know based on research to be one of the most central and important variables of therapy efficacy is the quality of the therapeutic alliance, which, like in any relationship, is a two-way street. That is, in order to optimize the bond of any relationship, including that of therapy and supervision, requires honest and respectful engagement from everyone who is involved. I'm a clinician, I'm also a supervisor, and I'm also a person with lived experiences, specific identities, cultural identities, personal thoughts, personal feelings, such that if my client or trainee perpetrates a clear microaggression, as a person, I'm going to think and feel some kind of way. I mean, I'm a person, not a machine, and I'm the other important half of the therapy or supervisory relationship. So I submit that my personal thoughts and feelings and reactions do in fact matter. And I submit that we have to acknowledge this and have to work with it. That by focusing on me as a clinician, as a supervisor, right, at times when appropriate, I am in fact working to help support and optimize the therapeutic or supervisory alliance with my clients and with my supervisees. So for me, as a general rule of thumb, in any given DEI conversations, I practice centering the most subjugated identities that are being amplified and focused on for any particular situation or conversation. And in practice, this might mean clinicians and supervisors bearing more of the responsibility and more of the risk to broach a difficult DEI conversation. In the case where a clinician also has a marginalized identity. So let's say in my case as a woman of color, when I'm working with a white male client, for instance, and the source of my client's microaggression is based on race or gender, I might center my personal identities, right, while also acknowledging and staying accountable to my privilege as a clinician. So this is a both and situation and not a either or. We can and we must do this. I also know firsthand experience this is a heck of a lot easier to say than actually do, right? And in large part because legitimate, righteous emotions, strong, difficult to experience emotions for the person who is the clinician or supervisor in my case can really easily take over. Right? So given all of this, the long-standing and still unresolved ongoing trauma, the strong, very difficult to manage emotions such as pain, fear, shame, guilt, high stakes that are involved, and the complex matrix of intersections of power, privilege, and identities taken together, no wonder missteps are almost inevitable and they abound for all of us, myself included. So given all of this, what ends up happening? Let's take a look at the next slide to see some common missteps that abound and frequent these DEI conversations or attempts at these DEI conversations. So knee-jerk reactions, right? Our emotion center, amygdala, are really super activated with very strong emotions. What happens? Well, for all of us, right? We are more prone to knee-jerk reactions. What do I mean by that? First, we might fight with others. This might look like me talking at and not with someone, attacking, right? This might be my defensive reaction, for instance, to a comment or even a criticism made by my colleague, a supervisor, client, a trainee. I might react by saying, "That's not what I meant, James. You took it the wrong way. I'm feeling attacked by what you just said. I'm offended," right? These can easily become fighting words, right? Indicating to the other person or persons, okay, you want to do this? Let's go, right? And in today's culture, I personally think Twitter is a prime example of this type of habituated way of communicating with others, talking at and not with. And we all know how well all that's working out. It's contributing really to growing polarization and divisiveness. And there's a lot of interesting research that's coming out globally based on analysis of social media conversations or interactions. And certainly it's corroborating this notion that, in fact, we are talking a lot more with one another, but in fact, it's contributing, statistically significantly contributing to growing polarization and a sense of divide. Another knee-jerk reaction might be that we freeze. We do say nothing when a particular topic comes up. I'm not going to engage, I'm going to avoid. I might think to myself silently, wait, what just happened right here? Did she just say what I think she said? Or I might think, oh, wow, an eruption of thoughts, of personal emotions on the inside, but on the outside, a deer in headlights. So we freeze and, we're not able to move the needle. Or I might flee, actively avoid a topic or situation altogether, switch the topics, of conversation, maybe directing a conversation to another topic when an uncomfortable DEI topic comes to surface in supervision or in therapy, work meetings. And sometimes unknowingly, because we are wired for aversion to pain and discomfort, I don't automatically lean in to the fear, uncertainty, challenge, or pain. This results in yet another opportunity lost and another data point that we encode as evidence that these conversations should be avoided and are not worth it. See, this never turns out well. Better to stay away. Finally, we might flock. which is instead of my going to the person with whom I should really be having this conversation, I might lament with other people, colleagues, with other trainees, with other supervisors, with other clinicians. I might lament with like-minded others. Again, this helps to relieve the immediate discomfort of strong and unpleasant feelings, but in the long run, it only serves to reinforce, if not embolden, individual hurts and certainly the interpersonal injuries. I want to take a quick minute on the next slide to situate this, all that I've said in terms of the challenges of DEI conversation and identify my own sociocultural location. I think this is really, really critical to DEI work, both in the capacity as a clinician, supervisor, as a trainer, as an educator. And so these are pictures of me. The first one is my passport picture when we came to the United States. I was 8. And then a few years later, this is a middle school picture. This is my baseline feeling and my emotions, right? Bitter. I'm hard pressed to find pictures of my childhood where I am genuinely smiling with glee and happiness. It's baseline bitter. I'd like to say that I've changed and evolved over the years into adulthood. I don't think that's necessarily the case. But for me, there is an activation of unresolved trauma. I'm Korean, and there is a very challenging history to Korea's 5,000-year-old history. And because of this history, Koreans actually have a unique emotion called Han, an emotion that has deep resonance to me and a lot of Korean people. And it's often referred to as almost an essential element to the Korean identity, a kind of a post-colonial identity that reflects the psyche of people who are colonized. So in terms of concrete emotions, it's a bit of an amalgamation of pain, of grief, anger, rage, loss, resentment, and deep sorrow that I believe, and that historians have, talked about how it captures the collective trauma and suffering as a result of oppression, of poverty, invasion, occupation of the Korean people over the course of its thousands of years of history. So, this anger and bitter for me as a clinician coming in, as a supervisor, even when I was a trainee, when I am in my capacity as a client in psychotherapy, my baseline, subjectively coming in is one of anger and bitter. It's my go-to. And the personal knee-jerk reactions that I typically fall victim to is attack and fight first and think about it later. Cancel people first, I wish I could say, especially having been invited to this platform, that I'm a much more evolved and self-actualized person in this capacity. It's not. This is just as much of my personal work as it is the work that I do professionally to help others. So my go-to is fight, attack. I'm a talk at you and not with you person. That's my habituated baseline. I want to have things, quick fixes now. I'm a CBT therapist. I love short-term models and approaches. I'm incredibly impatient in my personal and professional life. This is what I bring in personally to my DEI conversations. And I want to invite you to think about what you may have inherited, what has been bequeathed, if you will, to you as a result of your family history, of your cultural background, of your people, of your nation's history. Because our sociocultural history and location are essential and critical. For those of us who were trained back in the early, in the 1990s and 2000s, the Sue and Sue's tripartite model of cultural competence, that first component is that of self-awareness. And indeed, it is the first and most important, deep and necessary dive into our ability to be culturally affirming in our work. So I want to just, really encourage you that we cannot do this work if we don't really put ourselves front and center to think about both our areas of strength, our areas of vulnerabilities, right, and our areas for growth. So let's take a look at the next slide in terms of theoretical underpinnings of this model that I'm about to present to you. This reflects my own, These are some of the, I think, issues and challenges that make it hard for us as clinicians and supervisors and even trainees and supervisees to broach DEI conversations. I don't really know what to say. Don't want to bring it up unless my client or my supervisee does first. I don't want discomfort, conflict, rupture. Who does? Fear of maybe saying or doing the wrong thing, not wanting to hurt our clients, supervisees, or even supervisors' feelings. Fear of being wrong or vulnerable, fear of being misunderstood, judged, fear that my client or supervisee or supervisor might be upset with me, and fear of making it about me, not my client. These are frequent things, and they're not excuses, they're legitimate. And sometimes I challenge myself and I'm like, okay, what's your excuse? Okay, been there, done that. Now what's the other one? To really help myself lean in. It's a bit of an exposure therapy, isn't it? To resist the pull for avoidance and to really lean in as my brain is telling me all these reasons why I shouldn't engage. And maybe some of this resonates with you. Let's take a look at the next slide. I want to briefly, there should be a slide. Yes, can we go to the next slide after this, Sam? Okay, let's go back. I'm so sorry. So what can we do? So this is the model that I had developed some years back, and very quickly in the yellow-orange, the goal, barriers, and values, this is the preparation, the prep phase before the actual conversation. In green, opener, action, listen, and respond. That's where the actual conversation is transpiring. And then the last phase, or the last step, step 8, is repeat. How are we able to sustain and maintain this work, throughout the course of our professional work? So this is the 8-step model, the Kim Constructive Conversations model. And if we could go to the next slide. So briefly, what is a constructive DEI conversation? My definition is a respectful exchange on matters of culture, diversity, in which we talk and listen, and I'll unpack this a bit more in the upcoming slides, with genuine openness and an effort to mutually understand and impact each other. So, in the interest of time, I don't have the luxury to pause and unpack each of this, but I put it in bold. It's respectful. It doesn't mean we actually agree or we come to consensus. Yeah, we're talking and listening. I deserve my experiences to be heard, and so does the other person. Right? I'm willing to do both, and really aiming and gearing for mutuality and reciprocity. To understand and so that we can do our part in moving the needle to DEI work and social justice, to be audaciously honest and brave, and to stay in relationship connection. If we could take a look at the next slide. So here are the theoretical underpinnings, and this reflects my own training as a clinician, both in grad school and beyond, and the 20 plus years since. And this is very intentional in putting this approach together. So CBT, really a step-by-step approach. How the locus of control could be with me. So much of the time when I'm doing my own, therapy with clients, I do family work and also individual. It's like, can you change my kid? Can you change my partner? Can you change? It's like, okay, I wish I had the magic wand to change my partner and my kids, right? And we don't. So really focusing on the locus of control really being within me and fully using the important and robust instrument that we have at our disposal and our control. Very much skills building. The attachment theory really is I believe, the fundamental foundational underpinning, because we are, as social emotional animals, we are wired for connection. Trauma happens in relationship connection, not a very functional relationship connection, but it happens, we perpetrate it onto one another. And as such, healing must also happen in connection. And this is why the therapeutic alliance is so powerful. Someone is bearing witness, is taking a risk to believe, the experiences that I've had. That is powerful for the mammalian brain, for us that are socially driven, and for our brain that is wired for connection. And so this approach absolutely privileges and centers that at the core. Tenets of Buddhist psychology of mindfulness, mindful responding versus these knee-jerk reactions. Really anchoring ourselves in values. So much of things could be analyzed intellectually and concretized in skills, and yet to lean into fear, to lean into uncertainty, to lean into pain requires a certain orientation of heart and spirit. Yeah? And this is where values come in. And the diffusion from, I say delusion with all due respect, from this idea of quick and easy fixes, the right answer, perfect outcome. I think, I'm a type A, so I have to loosen my attachment and grip to, perfectionism at times. So attachment to, again, specific outcomes, including perfect outcomes or certain outcomes, resolved outcomes, and to resist the pull for avoidance of people, situations, and certain topics. And then ultimately looming large over all of this is our values and our mission of social justice, of reparation and accountability, and how we each have an individual responsibility as professionals and as citizens, and we have opportunity, I believe, every day and every moment to help collectively move the needle towards a world that is a bit more socially just. So here are the theoretical underpinnings, and if we could get right to the model and to the approach, and I'll to the next slide, please, Sam. So very quickly, I typically do this training like in a series or at least a day long. So this is going to feel very brief and surface, but I also am providing some resources that I believe Sam and Barbara will be forwarding to you, and hopefully that will allow you to have some supplemental material for a deeper dive. So step one, remember steps 1, 2, and 3 is the preparation. This is pre-conversational phase. So first and foremost, why do I want to have this conversation with my client, with my supervisee, with my supervisor? It's really, really important. And what I have found is that more often than not, if I don't slow down to make this clear, for me, why I'm trying to have this conversation with my colleague, with my, with my partner, with my neighbor, with whoever, is because I'm right and they're wrong, and I want to correct them. I want to bequeath them an opportunity to say sorry, right? And it's like, okay, wait a minute. Even when I'm on the receiving end of that, and I know that I'm in the wrong, or I may have had a misstep, that never feels good, right? Yeah, it never feels good. So why do I want to have this conversation with my client? Having a very sobering, clear, and honest conversation with myself. What outcome or outcomes might I be seeking or fantasizing about? If it is, with my coworker, with my client, with my supervisee, I was wrong, you were right, Anastasia, then I need to, wait it out. Because it's very difficult to be wedded so strictly to a particular outcome. The conversation is a difficult one. It could be a turbulent one. It's wrought with strong emotions. And somehow I'm saying I'm going to be the sole driver, and I'm going to tell you how we're going to journey this particular path. I don't know any passenger who'd want to really come along with me on that ride. Second step on the next slide, please. So after we make some of this clear, what might be some barriers that get in the way, right? So there are some external barriers. Typically with clients, it's things like time. So, these doorknob confessions that our clients make, or sometimes I'm telling myself, I'd like to broach this, but I don't think we have enough time, excuses that I tell myself, or even with my supervisees, right? So, or it might be that there are other pressing issues, right? And there indeed might be some pressing issues, but at times it might be an excuse that I use. There are also internal barriers. Again, those strong emotions. Maybe fear, again, of not knowing what to say, not wanting to bring it up before my client does, saying something wrong. I don't really like to be vulnerable. I'm okay with holding space for other people to be vulnerable, but I don't know that I want to do it, right? My own anger, possibly, of racism, classism, heterosexism taking over. I'm like, am I regulated enough right in this moment to be able to bring this up so that my emotion doesn't really take over? Maybe my client might not like me or trust me as a result. Am I making this about me and not my client? I mean, the therapy really is about my client, or supervision really is about my supervisee. Am I just taking up sort of space in a way that is really not productive and self-consuming? And then, of course, for many of us, the ultimate fear of conflict or rupture in therapy or supervisory relationships. Even as we know that growth in so many different domains often comes with a necessary element of growth is missteps, is ruptures, is disconnections, is sometimes conflict. It's our muscles getting stronger. They break down so that they could come back stronger with the possibility. Even as we know that intellectually, there's such an aversion to the possibility of that happens. And as such, we can stand in our own way in terms of our capacity to optimize our growth. Let's take a look at the next and the final step in this preparation phase. So this is where values enter. So how do I stay aligned with my goals and these barriers, especially strong emotions abound? What do I do? This is where our capacity to anchor in values can be very useful. So one of courage and patience, integrity, gratitude. This is certainly not an exhaustive list, but I know for me personally, I think about honesty, faith, and courage. Those are my go-to personally and professionally. Having a little bit of faith to really lean in to a space of uncertainty can be very daunting. I'm a self-identified control freak. I like everything planned, and I'd like to decrease risk as much as possible. I like to be in control. And there are certain situations in which, as much as I can prepare, is an abyss of uncertainty. And I am still invited and trying to invite myself, daring myself to lean into that. And this is where an orientation of spirit and attitude and heart can be really, really powerful. So now let's say we have prepared sufficiently enough, and now we enter the conversational phase. In the next slide, please. Well, before that, here's an illustration. Right? So let's say that a client makes a racist, sexist, homophobic, classist, Islamophobic, transphobic, whatever phobic or ist comment, let's say, is made during session. It could be a therapy session. It could be a supervisory session. What might be my goal, barriers, or values before we move on to the conversational phase? So the goal, what do I want to do and why? Maybe for me, if this happens in my capacity as a clinician or a supervisor, I want to be able to address the pain or rupture as a result of my client or supervisee's comment. Why do I want to do that? Because the quality of our mutual alliance matters. I know me. I'm a reactive, neurotic, person with strong emotions, right? And so I can't just really hone in, suspend the reactions that I'm having. I can't suddenly decide I'm going to completely compartmentalize it. And my ability to be a good therapist and a supervisor is to be super attentive and attuned. And if there is something that is disrupting my capacity to do that, then it's my ethical responsibility, if not a moral mandate, for me to address that. This is no different than me maybe grieving because something traumatic has happened in my personal life and deciding, I better cancel my session because I can't be present with my client, right? We know this as part of our ethical standards. So this is no different, in my opinion. What might be some barriers that might get in my way? Well, like I said, I'm a strong feeler, bit neurotic, hot-tempered. So I might be experiencing anger because of my own personalized, long-standing racialized injuries, right? Or class issues. having grown up poor, maybe like, the residuals of poverty still remain, and I'm very sensitive to it, even in middle age. And so, maybe that might take over. I might have a fear or anxiety that my client might feel criticized, shamed, and invalidated. Right? So this is where we have to use our expertise and our capacity to know ourselves. Right? We remain one of the most important instruments in psychotherapy and supervision in our places of work that is within our control. So I better know myself better than anyone in this situation so that I can take measured risks. Right? And then finally, values. So I know these exist. I'm in full acknowledgement. What can I do? How can I stay anchored in spite of the barriers? I'm going to really pull up courage to encourage and model honesty, respect, and dignity. That's the kind of space that I'm trying to cultivate with my clients, with my supervisees. And I want to be able to show it and to practice it myself. I want to have faith that me and my client and my supervisee are indeed capable of having difficult conversations in spite of the expected and maybe inevitable missteps and clumsiness that might come with our attempt. Now let's look at the actual steps for conversation. So step 4. So if this is the situation, my client, has made a particular, and I want to raise it, we need to have an effective opener. Effective openers helps us slow down. It helps us set a conscious intention. And really, this next point of increased likelihood of receiving our invitation, we want to make sure that the greatest risk of having DEI conversation is that there is a premature abortion, if you will, of conversation because of strong feelings, because of our defensiveness. And what we want to do is make sure that we're addressing that. How do we stay in relationship connection, even in the face of strong emotions, even as the eruption of my strong emotion, the other person's strong emotions and thoughts and feelings and experiences come into collision? How do we stay connected? Yeah. And so in a situation like this, I might say something of the following. If you're okay with it, I'd like to go back to what you said a few minutes ago, or maybe what you said last week. If I don't trust myself at the moment to raise it, right, I want to take a risk and ask about a comment that you made. Of course, there's nothing prescriptive here. I don't want you to take this and okay, cut and paste it, because it's not what we say, it's how we say it. It's our attunement to when to say it, how we say it, the pace with which we say it, the nonverbals with which we say it too. So all that really, really matters. But this is how, in terms of actual words, I might use. And on the right, the essential ingredients being putting myself, the I statements, accentuating my values, and making sure that there is an invitation, that there is a clear communication of an invitation. Let's take a look at the next step. So what happens after the opener? Then we're delivering the sensitive cargo. On the left are the essential ingredients, if you will, of delivering sensitive cargo, which is why, me, and ask. So here's an illustration. Not sure if I misheard you. I want to give my client or the other person a benefit of the doubt. When you said such and such, I admit I was taken aback. I was a bit taken aback, right? So the impact on me, what is my experience? That's the sensitive cargo. I wanted to check in to see if I heard you correctly. And because I very much appreciate our ability to be open and honest with each other. Yeah. So this is the why I'm having this conversation with you. Remember, I want to acknowledge the fact that when any criticism or anything negative in the way of feedback, even if it might be legitimate, right, comes, most of us get in a defensive position automatically, right? So to acknowledge that reality and to ensure that we could even stay more connected, to not sever that bridge, I want to accentuate very clearly why I'm bringing this up. If you're willing, I'd love to hear a bit more about what you meant when you said such and such, right? So this is the very clear, unequivocal ask and invitation. I want to hear. I'd love to hear a bit more. Maybe I misunderstood you, okay? The next slide. So let's say the client, the other person offers, right? And then it's our job to listen. Listening is an art form, isn't it? Where a lot of us are in the business of listening. And there are some studies that I had come across, I'm sorry I don't have the citation, that even among professionals whose business it is to listen, including psychotherapists, we're not as good as we think we are, right? It's a very sobering reality. So how do we listen fully and deeply, focused attention? How do we listen for accuracy coming from the other person? How do we listen for intention? In DEI work, there's a lot of righteous emphasis on impact, accountability to impact. That's not what I meant, Anastasia. What I meant, it's like, okay, and you have to still take responsibility for impact. But to be clear, intentions matter. If I intended to hurt someone and to be discriminatory, makes a difference than if I didn't intend and it's out of my ignorance. Okay, so intentions and really to understand. So really asking yourself, am I really a good listener? I think one barometer is asking, a very trusted family member, partner, because they're the ones who are going to give you an honest answer, not necessarily your colleague, your students, your trainees. They're going to say, yeah, you're a good listener, Dr. Kim, right? But it's my husband, someone I've been with for a long time, who'll say, you interrupt a lot. There you go again, right? Which gives me a much more accurate, assessment of the areas that I need to work on. The next slide, please. Then after I'm going to show you one, round, if you will, of back and forth. And so let's say that you're listening, your client, your other person offers something, then it's my turn to respond. And on the left, they are the essential ingredients or elements, if you will, of response in DEI conversations that promote impact. So I might say, thank you, so-and-so, for sharing all of that with me. So I want to appreciate, I'm not agreeing necessarily, but I'm appreciating the fact that they have accepted my invitation for this conversation. It seems that from your perspective, I have misunderstood your intention. Yeah, I want to be able to acknowledge. Again, I'm not necessarily agreeing, but I want to be able to acknowledge what the person shared. For me, what I thought I heard you said felt very painful. And I might even add if it involves a personal identity or experience, especially given my personal experiences. I appreciate and hope that we can continue to be open and honest with each other like we have been today or like we are doing now, because it's very important to me and really to our work together. So something with this spirit. Let me give you a slightly different scenario. Let's say I'm on the receiving end. Thank you for your willingness to talk with me about this. I heard you say that you found my comment to be offensive. Did I get that right? I want to make sure I accurately captured the comment and the feedback from the other person, maybe my trainee, supervisee. I wasn't aware of this. In fact, I was a bit shocked to hear you say that my comment had such a negative impact. So here I'm remaining honest. I'm not going to feign like, oh, I'm sorry. I know so many folks, myself included, I'm like, I don't know. I'm clear. It's clear, but I don't know. And feigning that I know, I really understand when in fact I don't, I think is disingenuous, and it doesn't uphold what I'm personally trying to do, which is have a relationship with a client or with supervisee, with colleagues that are honest, that are brave, and respectful. I'm anxious to admit that I'm still not sure I fully understand. However, because this is clearly important, I'd like to take some time to think more about what you shared, and I hope we can talk about this again to better understand each other. And then maybe I'll bring it up next time, right? I want to say, you are important. What you shared is important. I still don't get it, right? But I could sense this is important. And because my relationship to you is important, because I consider you an important person, I want to take the time that your comment deserves to try to digest it, try to understand it, try to unpack it, and I want to come back. In any relationship, personal or professional, this is one way we communicate the importance of someone else. You meant enough for me to take time to think about, to work on, to try to understand. And with our clients, with our supervisees, with our supervisors is no different. And then the final slide and the step is repeat. So one conversation, remember the whole, like, this is long standing, it's unresolved, it's still unfolding, strong emotions abound. Look how polarized we are, and look how much divisiveness really abound in our culture today. So one conversation is not going to be enough, even with the same person. So how do we engage? How do we challenge ourselves to stay in reflective mode? How do we rework any missteps? I invite myself personally to compassionate self-interrogation, after I'm like, all right, like, I think that went well. And sometimes when something goes really well and I feel good about it, that's when I'm like, uh-oh, am I like glossing over certain areas that I need to continuously work on? So repeating the cycle, how can we do it continuously so that we're able to really amplify and support the larger DEI goals and goals of social justice in our work and also in our personal capacities. Let me turn to the next slide as I wrap up. I know that in a lot of DEI work, and training and exercises, there's an expectation, if not at times a demand for safety. And here are all the rules that we're going to abide by before we open up the space so that everyone stays safe. I don't like that word because often I think it gets used interchangeably with comfort. How can you guarantee that this is going to be comfortable for me? And in fact, what I can guarantee is it is not going to be comfortable. Right? So instead of safe space, I like to think about this as brave space. And to that end, I want to offer this quote from Mickey Scott Bay Jones. And she says this: safe space framing sometimes creates fear, confusion, and an unrealistic expectation of pain-free, conflict-free space. Brave space is a framework that allows us to focus on creating an inner space of bravery, build spaces where we can bravely risk mistakes, issue call-ins to each other to more truth and more love, and co-create a space where we each have room to grow as activists while still being accountable to center the most marginalized among us. If we do this right, if I do this right, then I am perpetually uncomfortable. If I'm going to the gym to get stronger and I come out of the gym and no muscles ache and no muscles are uncomfortable, then that was not a good workout. I shouldn't expect some grand reward of being really buff and a six-pack after I feel nothing, right? This, in fact, is no different. So I want us to really think about, and I'm constantly trying to challenge and remind myself to think about, like, it's a good kind of a hurt. It hurts real good. That exercising bravery comes with sitting in the midst of emotional storms. And this is where the values of Buddhist psychology, can really be helpful. The audacity of me and you and other people of each other sitting in the midst of the emotional storms of uncertainty, of fear, of pain, of shame, and of guilt. And then having the audacity to have faith that we can sit and inviting the possibility of something different happening. So let me turn to the final slide, and I'm mindful that, as usual, I'm a poor time manager. I have 5 minutes. So any questions and reflection in the time remaining? And, on the bottom, there is an executive summary of this approach. There's also a book, but there's also an executive summary. And the IATP is a fillable PDF. It should be made available to you from either Barbara or Sam if you haven't received it already. So let me pause there. If we could go to gallery view, Sam. If there are any comments, thoughts, questions, maybe things that have worked for you that you're using that we could benefit from your wisdom and your experience. I want to invite those now.
And before we do that, I just want to say thank you. And you would be hearing applauses if this was in person. So this is our virtual applause. Thank you so much for such a comprehensive presentation. And we do have someone who very early on in your talk posed a question. So I want to read that out loud. Wondering about concepts of impact of early developmental experience, such as infant infant and caretaker, and also countertransference and transference. I'm not quite sure about what that last piece is, but if the person who asked the question is still here, SR, feel free to fill in the blanks. Okay, I guess take it away, Dr. Kim.
Yeah, so maybe, my understanding, what's resonating with me is on this comment, which I don't know if it's a question or maybe a comment, but absolutely early developmental experiences matter. We are nothing without our context. There's contexts that are waiting for us before we come into this world, for Pete's sake. Right? So all of those things are extremely impactful and influential, and something that we need to consider. My argument and my position is that we can do both. We can honor, even very painful, traumatic, developmental experiences of our client, of ourselves, and also be brave in this moment. And in fact, so much of my work professionally has been with, low-income BIPOC communities. I think that sometimes professions, including psychiatry and psychologists, we come in riding in our metaphorical white horses to save the day, and in some ways we end up lowering the bar because we want to save, those poor babies. You can't possibly do this, so let me do it. Speaking as a BIPOC person who grew up poor with, a lot of, high score on the ACEs, I think that's, to me, I experienced that as extremely disrespectful, So, and maybe other folks feel differently. I'm not sort of saying we shouldn't have compassion. But part of being brave, I think, means I want to acknowledge that there are so many barriers systematically outside of you, your family, your community, that prevented you from being able to be well physically, psychologically, emotionally, or spiritually. I want to acknowledge that. And I also believe in your capacity, of being able to go for what it is that you want to. This is my own spiritual, in many ways, professional practice of Buddhist psychology and Buddhism in my own personal life. I believe inherently in our constitutional birthright wisdom that we all come into this world with. And so part of it is my capacity to go home to my own inner wisdom, and maybe my ability to support my students, my clients, to be able to go back to something that has always been theirs, and that cannot be robbed of them. And of course, transference and countertransference, even from a CBT person. I'm not such a strictly CBT person, full disclosure. I foundationally sort of CBT, but I'm a huge attachment person. So transference and countertransference, for those of my students and supervisees working with me and doing majority CBT work, is very, very central, because again, it is when a therapist, a clinician, and a client comes together, it is either the collision or a marriage and the merging of two cultures, and two worldviews. And transference, countertransference really means understanding reciprocity and mutuality in relationships. So it's extremely important and critical to the work that we do.
Thank you for that. RP, you have a question. Go right ahead.
Yes, thanks so much. I'm actually calling you from UC San Diego. So, and this was an absolutely wonderful presentation. Thanks so much. I noticed that in your model, when you talk about the steps, you don't necessarily have a step that is focused on sort of the correction of the ism or the whatever phobic comment that occurred, say, in a therapy session and a supervision session. So that doesn't seem to be part of your model. Maybe that evolves naturally, but I'm wondering where that fits in with sort of the social justice kind of principle, and how do you manage that? And sometimes does that come up, and do you feel compelled to sort of educate, correct, those sorts of things?
Yeah, thank you for that. It's a great question. No, it's not part of it. As much as I'd like to be prescriptive about how to correct, if you will, missteps and how to heal impasses and transgressions and microaggression, I think that what I have accentuated in this approach is less about how to do that concretely, like if somebody says this, do this, but rather having faith and trust and that whatever healing transpires between me and you, for instance, is going to be uniquely different from the sort of the two of us than versus what comes, from me and someone else or for you and someone else, So that is, I want to really privilege and have faith in the culture of two that gets developed between my clients, so that if a racist comment happens, let's say from client one, how I and that client one heal those, transgression is going to be unique to my relationship with that client, then how it happens and transpires with another client. With the first client, it might be very direct. I have had clients, young people like, ugh, what did I say? Oh, I shouldn't have said that. Oh, making some comment. A client sort of said like, blah, 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 those, Asian kids and, college, but, and then she pauses, she turns around, she goes, but not you, Anastasia. And I'm like, yeah, of course, not me. So the way we heal that relationship, because I had been working with this young lady for such a long time, was through humor. Because that was the relationship and that was the language that she and I had developed over 4 years of working together. Would have been very different in terms of how I healed that exact situation with another. So from this approach, I am really, as much as of a bit of a control, neurotic person that I am, and like everything sort of planned, I really wanted to privilege and center the uniqueness, the unique language and the culture of whoever comes, because there's such a pull for this work to be prescriptive. I work with big organizations. They're like, well, what do we do when somebody says sort of this? And I'm like, did you want me to spell it out so you could plug in the formula? Well, that ain't going to work. It's like, it might work, but I am certain that it is just a matter of time before. You have to really, really privilege and lead with our emotions, our true fears, and develop organically what transpires between. And because we are in this business of therapy, I feel like we are uniquely positioned to be able to take a deeper dive. Yeah. So I don't have a prescription sort of for that. I trust that when we could stay in relationship connection, maybe it's through humor, maybe it's a direct addressing of missteps and correction, maybe it's actually indirect, and it's absolutely indirect, and it might work for one client or one situation, but it might not. But it allows us really to embody the spirit of multiculturalism, which is there isn't a singular monolithic path to healing, including healing in conversation. There is a multitude, a cornucopia, a limitless, boundless paths to how we heal. And sometimes it's verbal, sometimes it's in performance, sometimes it's, direct and indirect. That to me is the spirit of multiculturalism, to be able to honor whatever uniqueness comes from those relationships and to know that that is right and it may not be right for someone else. So that's my intentionality, behind not creating a step, if you will, for how to correct mistakes or missteps.
Thank you for that very comprehensive response, and I wish we had more time. This was so lovely being with you, sharing this space. I hope at one point we get to actually be in person, and I can say the hello in person. I want to thank everyone for your participation today, and I just want to acknowledge all the appreciations you're getting, Dr. Kim.
Well, thank you so much. I'm in this work with you, so very good to be in this work with all of you. And, I hope that we can share, we'll be in contact again sometime.
We're in it together. You're part of the tribe.
That's right. Yeah.
Take good care.
I need some counsel and support too. So I hope to
back at you. Take good care, everyone.
Thank you.